Welcome, Paula. Thanks for being here on the podcast today.
Thank you, Angie, for having me. I'm so looking forward to our discussion.
You have such great, valuable information or wisdom to share with our listeners because burnout, stress, what happens in companies on a day to day basis and the effect it actually has on the companies is an ongoing problem. And you and I had kind of talked about it a little bit about how the word is thrown around as far as burnout is concerned. And we've taken a very generic kind of definition to it and what it takes to overcome it. So I really want to dig in with you today on that and let our listeners, both on the ownership side of the companies and our leaders, but also as the employee side, to understand what to look out for. So I'm happy we get to dig into that today. So let's start off first with really kind of giving me that true definition of what you believe burnout is.
Yeah, so I define it pretty simply. And there are honestly a number of different definitions out there, but I just think of it as chronic workplace stress left
Mm.
unchecked. And so the word chronic is really important. So one of the things that differentiates burnout from just everyday stress that we all experience is that it's something that I can't shake. More often than not, I'm experiencing kind of what we know are the three big dimensions of this thing called burnout. Like I can't shake it; it's not going away. And the
Mm.
other important word is workplace. And so,
Mm-hmm.
as you mentioned, we use the word burnout a lot. We use it as, I think, a replacement term again for just stress. We have a really bad day and we
Mm-hmm.
come home maybe and we're like, oh, so burned out. And in
Yeah.
reality, what we probably mean is I just had a really stressful day. And so burnout is really when the World Health Organization updated its definition and its thinking about burnout back in, I believe, 2019, it really made clear that we're talking about a workplace or an occupational phenomenon. That if we're
Mm.
experiencing burnout, there is a workplace cause, a workplace root, a workplace association with whatever it is that we're experiencing.
Interesting. So, because on my side, I always talk about burnout in the sense of like, what can people do for themselves, like outside of work to avoid that burnout? But if I'm hearing you correctly, it almost sounds like it doesn't really matter what you do outside of work for that. If it's happening in your workplace, you're still going to be burnout there.
Yes. So, what I like to think, we tend to think of burnout, and this is one of the ways that we've gone wrong. And another way that we've gone wrong in the burnout conversation
Mm-hmm.
is we tend to think of it as an individual failing of stress management, solely an individual failing of stress management. And so, then what leaders and teams and organizations used to do is they would say, well, let's just path these people into the well-being offerings that we have, into our employee assistance program offerings, and people would kind of consume those materials and they wouldn't feel better, or it would help them a little bit. And in
Mm-hmm.
reality, the cause of burnout is very systemic. It's very organizational focused, culture focused, teams focused, and leaders have an inordinate responsibility and factor to play in whether burnout happens in organizations and to people eventually. So I now think of it as it's the individual manifestation of a workplace systems or culture issue, which isn't to say people don't have anything to do. They can't do anything to help themselves. But if we were going to think about this as like a pot, like a little bit of a pie, whereas the old thinking
Mm-hmm.
is it's 100% on individuals. They caused it. They need to fix it themselves. I would
Right.
probably say that it's probably more 70-75% on organizations and teams and leaders to be thinking about, and
Mm.
25 to 30% on individuals. So there's still a role that we can play. It just doesn't look like we think it might look like if we're going to try and do something about it.
Okay, I have so many questions that are like running through my head now. I'm like
Yeah.
frantically trying to write them down so
Yeah,
we can ask them
no.
all.
Yes.
First, let's back up for a second so that when people are listening and they're going, okay, so burnout, I hear what you're saying definition wise, but what does it look like? Give me an example of somebody who is feeling burnt out or is going through burnout as an employee or somebody who's working. What are they typically experiencing that would be those red flags to say you're definitely burnt out?
Yes. So first of all, let's talk about the three big dimensions of burnout, because I think this is a really
Mm-hmm.
important component for us that will set us on the right conversation versus just thinking about it as general stress. So first and
Okay.
foremost, there's chronic physical and emotional exhaustion. And this is
Mm-hmm.
day in, day out, more often than not, over a period of time. So there is no evidence. Like, I can't say, like, you're burned out after 3 months if you've been experiencing this. It's different for everybody, which is another thing that makes it hard.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just that sense of, no matter like what I used to do to manage my stress, whether it was taking walks or hanging out with friends, or for me it was playing co-ed sports with my friends, that wasn't giving me the energy replenishment, and I
Mm-hmm.
couldn't figure out how to get that sense of energy into me, to feel like I
Mm.
could, like, pop out of bed at work, on Monday morning and be like, woohoo, I'm excited to go to work. It was just
Yeah.
this slow drop and thud and Sunday scaries and the countdown on the clock where, Sunday night and it's like 6 o'clock and I'm like, oh, I gotta go to bed in like 4 more hours. And then just like, just
Mm.
constantly watching the time. So that sense of chronic physical and emotional exhaustion is a big, big hallmark. But what a lot of people also stop there when we think about burnout. We tend to think of it just as this syndrome of exhaustion, and it's a little bit more nuanced. And so the second big dimension is chronic cynicism. So this is, everyone annoys me, everyone bothers me, I'm irritated by people.
Mm.
For me, like when I experienced at the end of my law practice, I would, roll into work with a smile on my face. I would say hi to everybody in the office. And then I would go into my office, shut the door, and say, please don't anyone call me. Please don't anyone bother me. Like, just please leave me alone. Because when that cynicism piece and that exhaustion piece start working together, that's a really frustrating spot to be. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I'm annoyed kind of by my clients or my colleagues, and I'm exhausted. Like, you're just trying to find some pocket of energy during your day to sort of help kind of just get you through. And I
Right,
also
right.
too, with the cynicism piece, got very judgy. So that's something for people to think about. I started
Mm-hmm.
internally very judgy, thinking about why is it that I have so much work and it doesn't look like you all have so much work? And I started to
Yeah.
really kind of look at people differently because of that. So that's the second big piece. And then the third big piece, especially if you start to feel a sense of what the research calls inefficacy. So I translate
Mm-hmm.
that into, like, why bother? Who cares? Doesn't matter what I do anyway. It doesn't matter what I
Mm.
say. It doesn't matter how I show up. This is the way it's just going to be. And I'm frustrated and it's not going to change. And so
Mm.
when that mindset starts to set in, you start to notice a sense of disengagement, whether it's from your work itself, whether it's from your clients or your colleagues, because it's almost a sense of, like, helplessness. Like, there's just really nothing I can do about this. Is this even what I'm
Mm-hmm.
supposed to be doing? Where's the meaning in my work? Like, all of these questions start to come up. And so true burnout is all three pieces of that puzzle more
Mm.
often than not. So we all have bad days. We all have days where we're tired. We all have days where
Sure.
people really bother us and annoy us. But that, unless
Yeah.
it's going on for a period of time and it's like different from your normal personality and it's just not how you usually have operated at work, that's when we have to start thinking that it might be something else.
As you're saying all that, I'm thinking about that second part. The cynicism is like, I run into people like that, and I'm like, they're so annoyed that they have to do their job. Like, this is your job, and you're so annoyed by it. And now I'm going to totally look at it differently. I'm going to be like, you are burnt out. We should check these other factors.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's a fruitful place for conversation, as you're mentioning, especially
Yeah.
as a coach and in one's coaching practice, to start to dig in for that. Because when you're experiencing those three dimensions, you start to throw off warning signs a little bit. And this
Mm-hmm.
is part of what I educate a lot of leaders and teams about as well, and people, because especially in hybrid work environments, we don't see everybody every day. And so where we could normally or sometimes maybe pick up on emotional cues, or like, wow, I've seen you
Mm-hmm.
like a week every day for a week and you seem off. Like, are you okay? We're missing a lot of that. And so when
Sure.
we're feeling this cluster of traits, we can be more reactionary about things. We can snap at people more. We can procrastinate. That's a huge first sort of early warning sign, is procrastination. Because you
Mm.
can imagine, if I'm
Mm-hmm.
exhausted and people are annoying me, it's not like I'm going to like jump into work and go, woohoo, I'm here. I'm
Right.
excited to like just tackle everything that I got to do.
Yeah.
For me in my law practice, I mean, I would go into work and instead of, focusing on the 100-page lease that I had to negotiate, I would sit and think about like recipes I was going to use when I started my baking or bakery company, which is what I thought I was going to do when I left my law practice. And so,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I wasn't as focused as I should have been. We have a hard time
Yeah.
concentrating. We start to get sick more frequently because of that chronic stress. So there's ways
Mm.
we can start to kind of parse this apart when we know what to look for.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting to me because from my coaching perspective, I talk to people about making sure that you get your values in. That's what gives us that energy, almost like you were referring to on that, kind of chronic physical and emotional, drain there. And if you get those values and you go on that walk, you do the things that you love, and you still don't get that refresh, that's kind of that sign. That's like, you've done your part, you've done your 25%, and it's still not moving the needle from you, then you've got to look into it a little bit more. And like you said, we have bad days. So maybe you're snippy at somebody one day, but if it keeps happening, then that's a little bit of a bigger flag. You mentioned kind of that last point there in the let me scratch that because I'm going to say that word wrong and we're going to delete this. Would you
Inefficacy.
refer to? Yes, and I can't even say it. We'll delete all that part, but
That's right.
in your third kind of pillar there of
Mhm.
looking out for that burnout, it almost sounds like victim mentality to me. Would you
It
equate it to
cha-
that, where you feel like you don't have a choice and you can't do anything about it?
what so kind of, and what really how this played out for me is when I noticed that something was wrong, when I noticed in my law practice that these other pieces had set in, and I didn't have the vocabulary to talk about this back then. I didn't know what burnout
Mm-hmm.
was. I couldn't say to someone, I'm feeling burned out. Something was just off. And I actually went to my boss, who I loved, one of my only bosses in 7 years of law practice, who I actually really trusted and loved, and said to him, I said, I don't know what's going on, but I'm really stressed. I'm overloaded with the commercial real estate work that I'm doing. I'd like to take a step back and take a break. Is it possible for me to do some other work in our law department? Could I do some trademarks work? Could I do some pure contracts work? Could I do something else
Mm-hmm.
for a bit of time just to give me a break and a pause? And he thought that that was a great idea, but others in our law department kind of shot that down essentially. And so
Mm-hmm.
that is to me when the sort of the helplessness behavior mentality started to set in. I was trying to fix my situation. And every
Mm.
time I reached out, every thought that I had, I kept hearing no, or we can't do that. And that's when I started to really feel like I don't know what to do about this, because I'm trying to get myself out of this in the way that I know how. I don't even know what this is. But I'm
Yeah.
trying to fix my situation and I can't. And that was really frustrating. That was exceedingly frustrating. It's one of the only times I think in my career where I really did feel what I would probably label as helpless, because I've always
Mm-hmm.
felt like I can call someone, I can ask a question. There's something that I feel like I can do about the situation to
Mm-hmm.
fix it or repair it, or at least alert somebody to it. And when I tried to make those attempts and they were squashed, that was exceedingly frustrating and really, I think really probably activated the next probably layer of my burnout, which wasn't good.
Right. Okay. So thanks for explaining that too, because I think there's a big difference in there where you were trying to do something, and that takes me back to a question I had when you were first explaining, in a sense of like sometimes you kind of are handcuffed, right? I mean, you're
Yes.
doing and trying to advocate for yourself and trying to make these changes, but what do you do when you're in that situation and your leadership and the company that you're working for isn't helping?
And that can be exceedingly frustrating, because not
Mhm.
everyone is in a position to leave their job or wants to leave their job. And so
Sure.
you really have to take a step back. And for me, it always starts with a conversation. And that's why I'm so big at helping people think about and understand what type of conversation to have when they're feeling burned out. Because if you go to your leader, whether you feel comfortable or not, or whoever it is that you identify that you want to talk to about this, and if you say something like, well, I'm just feeling really stressed, or I'm overloaded or overwhelmed, that's not going to usually trigger anything for them, because they're probably feeling that. And they know that everybody else is also, dealing with an unmanageable workload and
Right.
frustration. So it's not really helping them see how what you're going through is different. And so to the extent that you can think about as you go into a conversation what it is that you want. So you're seeing this
Mm-hmm.
happening, you're experiencing this happening. And so much depends on what kind of organization you work for, how big it is, what sort of avenues or pathways are possible. But try and figure out what it is that you want or need. Is
Mm-hmm.
it a little bit of time off? Is it and we know that vacations are really just a band-aid for burnout. So people do feel better when they're on vacation because they're out of the work
Temporarily, right?
context. Yes, yes. Then
Mm-hmm.
they come back, and it's usually within 2 or 3 weeks or so that they bounce back to their pre-vacation kind of burnout or stress level.
Sure.
So there's that piece. But thinking about like, do you think you would flourish better on a different team? Could you be reassigned to a different division? Could you, cut your hours possibly from full time to 80% or something like that? If your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
company offers sabbaticals and you qualify, is that something that you would consider or you would want? So some of it is trying to arm yourself with what you think can be done, and it can be exceedingly difficult and frustrating, especially if a big source of your burnout is, say, for example, a micromanaging boss. Then it
Mm-hmm.
becomes, there's only so much that you can do about bullying, incivility, micromanaging, and things of that nature. And so this is why it's such a systemic problem, because others in the organization then have to be so careful to not promote people who are exhibiting
Right.
those traits, or get them coaching, or some sort of help understanding that this is not how we lead. This is not effective leadership practice. And so at the end of the day, there's only so much that you can do
Mm-hmm.
uh, before you have to start thinking, is this damaging my health? Is this damaging my relationships? And it's usually, I tell people, once we're getting into those territories and those points, then you got to have a really strong conversation with yourself about, is this where I should be,
Sure.
and should I start looking for something else? So I'm actually never really an advocate about that being the first piece of the puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm actually the exception to the rule, probably, in terms of somebody who did leave a practice and going in a completely different direction. Um, so there's a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of things to really dig into and piece apart. And that's usually where I get with when I do coaching with people who are recovering from burnout or think they're experiencing it. Those are the deep layers of conversations that we have to have.
Sure. When you were saying that, it made me think of it's basically like you need to go with your ask. If you have a great leader, then they're probably going to ask you questions about like what would make this better, or what do you want?
Yes.
But if you just go with your feelings of I'm stressed, I'm fatigued, I'm burnout, I'm overwhelmed, or whatever, oftentimes leaders don't know what to do with those feelings. Like you said, they
Right.
generalize them. Everybody is, we got to get through this. But showing up with a request, almost a solution to your problem, is going to be probably a better way to go about it. Because, like I said, in the event you don't have that leader who really asks the question, then maybe you just get a little empathy or sympathy on your feelings, and,
Right.
back to your office or your cubicle you go. So let's
Yeah.
spin this on the other side. So we've got people that are going through the burnout like that from an employer side, from that leadership side. What should they be watching out for? I mean, is it truly just the reverse of this? The people that are not motivated, the ones that, maybe don't care about the work they're doing, are fatigued? What are those red flags that the employers might see in somebody who's burnout?
Yeah, so some of what we talked about before, you might see a drop in productivity. You might see
Mm-hmm.
procrastination. Like it usually starts to appear in that way because when we're feeling overwhelmed and exhausted and frustrated and annoyed, it's almost impossible to still do the same level of either quantity and or quality of work that we're used to doing. So something is
Mm-hmm.
probably going to give at some point.
Sure.
You're gonna hear maybe from other team members like so and so has just like really been off lately, and they may not even know how to
Mm-hmm.
describe it if they even say anything about it at all. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where having that environment of trust really becomes important. But so I mean, it can be really hard to suss out and sleuth out, and which is why a lot of people try to kind of squash it and hide it until they really can't, until there is
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps a mental health issue that has surfaced. For me, it took months, but eventually my burnout opened the door to anxiety. And so I was experiencing panic attacks very regularly. I ended up in the
Mm,
emergency room twice because I had really bad stomach aches from the stress that
wow.
I was experiencing. And again, that was the very end stage. That's nowhere near where I
Mm-hmm.
started, which is why if we can start to catch some of these, like, wow, Paula's rolling in late, like last in our department, like
Mm-hmm.
almost every day. I wonder what's up with that. And
Mm,
again, hybrid work makes it harder for us to see these
sure.
behaviors and pinpoint that. Or she's consistently late for meetings, or she's just not getting her deals done in the way that she used to, or there's usually something that we can start to see, and that doesn't even then mean that somebody's burned out, but it absolutely must, I think, for leaders, invite the question and a
Mm-hmm.
conversation with the person about, hey, like, just let, like, you know I care about you. You're a valued member of the team. Is everything okay? Because we're noticing, be very specific about the behaviors you're seeing. We're here to help, and we're here to, understand what's going on, and then, hopefully that will promote some sort of conversation. But it is so difficult, especially, someone like me, as I'm a licensed professional. I don't want to tell other people that I'm whatever it is that I'm experiencing. And so,
Right.
it just can be pretty difficult. And I also think, though, a lot of leaders, this is one of the things that I've been really, I don't want to say stunned about, but really something that has really registered with me over doing this work for the past few years is how much education leaders really need to have to understand
Mm-hmm.
really what burnout is and what causes it. Because they really, I mean, there's really such an ingrained sentiment of individual failing of stress management. I made it to this level, so other people should be able to make it to this level.
For
Uh,
sure.
those types of narratives, thinking that people are just weak and they can't handle it. I've had leaders tell me every single version and more of those types of statements. When in reality, I think one of the things that grabs leaders a lot when I talk to them is the core six framework. So a ton of research talking about, if you're noticing burnout in your organization and on your teams, you really got to look at six kind of core driving factors to see, all right, what's going on here. And there's usually, I mean, you can measure these. Actually, there's an empirically
Mm-hmm.
validated assessment tool to measure these. But when you start to dig into them, then you start to at least see, like, ooh, yeah, and then start to at least have the right conversation about the issue, if not, completely solve it. But
So you're saying when, employers or leaders are starting to see some of this, they really need to lean in a little bit more and kind of do this assessment and tune into these six core kind of root causes and go, where are we lining up against everyone else? And I think that brings up this conversation of, one, prevention, repair, how to avoid it. But yeah, the awareness, it starts there. And I know, I mean, from working with business leaders, I can't tell you how many people say to me, well, this person's so good. I just want to make sure they don't burn out.
yes,
I just want to retain them. I want to make sure they're happy, which can sometimes have people overcorrecting, right? Giving somebody way too much, paying them way too much, giving them all these benefits to where it tips the scales in not such a great way. When really, if we look maybe at these six root causes, we can just avoid the burnout in the beginning so you don't have to overcompensate in other areas. So
yes,
give those to
yes,
me. What are those
yes.
six? Yeah.
And it's a completely different way, I think, of looking at the problem. One where people then, you can see people's wheels turning once they see this,
Mm-hmm.
and then they can, if even if nothing else happens, they at least have the right framework to start looking at the issue through. So the first one
Right.
is unmanageable workload. And by far and away over the
Okay.
past few years, that has been, I would say, easily the number one driver of what I have certainly seen, as
Mm-hmm.
the teams and the organizations that I've worked with. By far, this is a very hard issue to deal with, especially when we were going through the Great Resignation and then the quiet quitting, and
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like, I can't find people. I've got
Yeah.
800 open spots when I normally have like 250. And so, trying to solve unmanageable workload by just waiting to hire people isn't probably going to help a whole lot. And so this is a
Mm-hmm.
very tough nut to crack because there is a lot that goes into unmanageable workload. There's our culture of busyness. There is what we say to ourselves in terms of narratives around, I'm a high achiever or I'm getting tons of work. That must
Sure.
mean I'm valued. So give me more. And now I got a
Yeah.
problem.
There's a lot in there. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot in there. And where I try to start with teams and leaders with this piece is helping them look at their communication practices first and foremost. There's a lot of unintentionality around how teams communicate. We just sort of have all these methods of channels to communicate, but we don't have a lot of intention over how we use them, or how should we start communicating, or is everybody on the team? And there's a lot of working parents who aren't available
Mm-hmm.
from like 6 to 9 perhaps, and so what are the norms around how we're going to communicate as a team? And then also meetings are a huge part
Mm-hmm.
of the unmanageable workload problem. And so helping
Yeah.
teams see how they can do a meetings audit. Do we even need to have a meeting about this topic? We are just reflexively adding meetings to everybody's calendar. We're even thinking about who needs to be at this meeting. Do
Mm-hmm.
we have an agenda? If we stayed focused, could we finish in 20 minutes instead of 60 minutes? And so it's trying to enter through those paths that I
Okay.
think helps at least give us a sense of control. We may not be able to fix the problem totally, but we can see pockets of influence, which can help.
But
So the unmanageable
auditing
workload
that.
piece.
Mm-hmm. Okay. What's number two?
Yes. So, and I'm not doing these in any particular order, although I would say
Yeah.
unmanageable workload by far is number one. But I would say
Mm-hmm.
a close second, quite honestly, is lack of recognition. And so
Mm-hmm.
this is a big one, but I think it's more within our control than, say, trying to fix an unmanageable workload situation. And I've had a lot of
Sure.
leaders say, like, gosh, if we could just get that one right, if we could do the recognition piece better, that might take some sting out of how we feel stressed about the unmanageable workload. Because if I'm being appreciated, if I'm being recognized authentically and in a way that matches how I like to be appreciated and recognized, now I'm kind
Mm-hmm.
of thinking like, wow, okay, I'm a valued, I more intrinsically know I'm a valued member of the team. All right, you need me to come in on a Saturday? I'll come in on a Saturday. You need me to work a little bit later? I'll put the kiddos to bed and then I'll patch back in at 11 o'clock at night. It might not get you that buy-in like all the time, but
Right.
really you'd be surprised how many organizations either don't do recognition really, or have tried to codify it in sort of like the gift cards and the every 5 years, we get the, pick a thing you can buy from a
Yes.
booklet and
Yes.
stuff, which isn't to say you should get rid of those things, right? Those have a function, but it's just not what we know produces the core stuff that will keep us in our job, the intrinsic motivation, the engagement, the meaning, and the deeper things that we need to feel. So
It's
lack of
different than like incentive, right?
yes.
The gift cards, the gifts, that's like incentive. And I think that triggers different people. Some people want the incentive, give me a reward for doing a really great job. And some people are like, I just want the pat on the back and the thank you and the mention of my name. And it's two totally different things. I,
Yes.
I can't help but hear these first two pieces, unmanageable workload and the lack of recognition. It's so interesting because many leaders or business owners, at least, both of those are kind of not important to many of them in a sense of one, I can do so much. It's how I started this company and everyone should be able to do as much as me. And two, like, it's your job. You just do what you need to do. We shouldn't need to be recognized. So I can see how those really kind of can trickle down
Yes.
into everybody at the company.
Our narratives trip us up in a very big way when it comes
Mm-hmm.
to understanding and dealing with burnout. What we say to ourselves in terms of what we feel a good professional should be, what we feel a high achiever should be, those rules that we've created around how we think the world should operate really get in our own way from a stress management perspective and other things. But from a leadership side, woof, like completely. I mean, and I hear that a lot. In fact, when I was just giving a workshop last week, and we were talking about recognition, and one of the leaders said, he's like, it's just making me feel sort of like, I don't know. He said, like, everybody gets a trophy. And I said,
Mm,
so what we're talking about though is what I call sticky recognition. And so you don't have
mm-hmm,
to, it's matching the recognition to the person, and you don't have to do that every day. It's when it
mm-hmm,
lands right, those are the times when you hear the stories from somebody who says, my boss called me up, I thought he was going to give me, another assignment, and he just said, thank you, the job that you did was great. I know it probably wasn't like the best assignment or the thing you wanted to do, but the way that it turned out, everything was well organized, and it really helped me be able to have the next conversation with my CEO. And I call that a thank you
mm-hmm.
plus. It's that extra little piece that when you add it tells me you are watching me, you see
Yeah,
me,
the
and you value
specific.
me. And it's
Mm-hmm,
specific. So it lands much differently than a thank you, which is probably going to make me feel good for about 30 seconds. And then I'm going to be off on my
mm-hmm,
way. Sticky recognition lands in a way that you will remember it 10 years from now or 5 years from now. And that's what we're trying to activate. And it's not everybody gets a trophy. It's a very specific, highly tailored version of recognition. And not everybody resonates with a thank you or a thank you plus. For some people,
mm-hmm.
it is include me on the next project. It is give me a seat at the table. Like, you're texting me. I hear this a lot. I get texted from my manager, and she's asking for my advice or my opinion. She's in this particular meeting. Just invite me to the meeting. Like, I'd like to be considered for my expertise and have a seat at the table. That's definitely another form of very powerful recognition. So for most people, it's some version of like words of affirmation of some sort, and or this sort of like include me and make sure that I'm part of the team. Really, the research shows that very few people will on their at the surface sort of say like, give me the the gift card or the what have you.
Right,
um
right. I love about the sticky recognition in the sense that like it builds confidence and it actually breeds more of what you want from somebody. So if you
yes,
liked what they did there, when you get specifics and thank them for that, it's going to encourage that behavior again and again. And so I love this takeaway right here for employees, for our employers and leaders, is to think about like, how can you give that thank you plus, and cause that sticky recognition so that people really do feel valued and they want to do more of what you shared. I love that. Love that.
yes,
That's
yes,
everyone's homework right now. Figure one
yes.
person to give that to today.
And you can, and the thing of it is, you can go do it now. Like, you can literally sit at
Right?
your desk or wherever you're at and think of somebody that you want to appreciate or recognize. Don't just start with thank you and then add that extra sentence. Like, literally, it will take you a minute or two to deliver. And the landing, like, for a minute or two to get a higher level. So what you just said, that activates my self-efficacy, that activates my mindset of, when I encounter this challenge or this issue or this project or whatever it is in the future, I know I've got something that I can rely on, that I can do
Mm-hmm.
something about. Like,
Yeah.
it's very, very linked to resilience. And so we know that sticky recognition can promote resilience. It can promote health and well-being and that intrinsic motivation, because you had to notice something specific about what I did, and that lands differently with me. That
Mm-hmm. For
says you
sure.
were watching, and that says that you're psychologically, you're telling me I'm a valued member of your team. Even though you're not
Mm-hmm.
actively saying those words, the response and the psychology behind it activates all of that. And so for
Sure.
me, if I can just try and get leaders and like take 2 minutes and really try and start there, it really can be a very fruitful entry point, not to solving the entire problem, but to certainly helping getting things going in a better direction.
Yeah. And we don't have a ton of time, so we have to zip through these other ones. But one
Yes.
last point on that is almost this need for leaders and business owners to kind of, I'm going to just say it, get over yourself in being grateful for people, in not expecting that it is just their job, because that is something that comes up all the time. Like, we're hesitant, or business owners are hesitant to give gratitude for something that people are paid for. And it's just God, I don't know. I mean, what do you think, Paula? Why does this show up for people not wanting to say thank you instead of having this response of like, that's what I pay them for. It's their job. I shouldn't have to thank them. They get a paycheck for that.
Yes, and the paycheck though is the fulfillment of an employment contract. Whether you have an actual employment contract with somebody or you're an at-will employee, it's a business
Mm-hmm.
transaction. I show up and I do some work and you pay some money for me. So it's a very transactional, sort of like, arrangement. And so it's great. I mean, I get some money and you're getting some work out of me, but I mean, I'm hoping if you decided to wear the leadership hat, you want something more in your environment. You want something more for your employees. You want something more for the people with whom you work. And you want them because one of the big issues I hear over and over is talent retention. We want to keep great
Mm-hmm.
people. Just giving
Yes.
them a paycheck and sending them on their way and like just treating them like a cog in the wheel, which is how you end up feeling, isn't going to accomplish that. And so hopefully as a leader you would want more than that. And then it's also time again to take a step back and think about those narratives, those core values about how you were raised through the system, and whether
Mm-hmm.
having that mindset of, well, it's just their job is really getting you what you want at the end of the
Right,
day.
right. Gosh, I could seriously have a whole conversation on this. I think it's so
Oh no, I
powerful.
could too. To me, it's bizarre. It's
It's
just weird.
well, it's like I can see it from both sides, and I get that personality type. Sometimes you do feel like it is just your job, and if you don't need that recognition, that's tends to be how you feel. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head when you said like it's a transaction, and the paycheck is to fulfill that agreement, and that paycheck can be received from other places. So if you want to go above and beyond getting the paycheck and you want to retain somebody, you want the culture, you want to avoid the burnout, that's where this other thing comes into play. It's
Yes.
not gratitude because they did their job, it's gratitude because you want a higher level employee, because you want healthy people, because you want a culture and you want retention at your company.
Well, and
So
I,
you have to
I
think
think
of it at that next layer.
you do, and I always then ask leaders to think about who would they say was a great leader for them when they were
Mm,
ascending through their career. What traits did that leader or did those leaders exhibit? Whether you consider a leader to be a parent, a teacher, literally somebody within the confines of work, and you would
mm-hmm.
never hear them say, "Oh, they were just somebody who like gave me my paycheck and sent me on my
Right,
way."
right.
You would hear these things like they supported me, they valued my opinion, they trusted me, they
Yeah,
asked me for advice, they inspired me, like, and so it's then such a disconnect. Then why you would we could do a whole like 2 or 3 hour conversation
I
about
know.
about this and
And
the fact
money
that
is easy,
it's
right?
that's
Money
part
is
of it
easy. Like
too. I don't
part
have to
a
do
lot of times
anything.
the business owners, right, want to just go, here's some extra money, let me give her a raise, let me give her some time off, and it's like, just say the thank you, give a sticky recognition. It's free, and has
And
so
it's
much more
it's 2 minutes.
impact.
Literally, it's free and it's 2 minutes and it unlocks.
Yeah.
So it's not about the other thing that I want to try and get people to switch to is that this isn't about stroking someone's ego. Giving recognition in the right
Mm-hmm.
way is not about stroking someone's ego. It's giving them the psychological fuel to unlock motivation and engagement. And if you're a leader who says,
Mm,
I don't want my team to be motivated and I don't want them to be engaged, you probably shouldn't be in your position leading. So I don't think any leader would say that. And so if those are things that you
mm-hmm.
want, which most, if not all leaders do, then you got to look at the pathways that get you to that point, and just handing somebody money doesn't do it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, I love that. Psychological fuel to unlock potential and motivation. Love it.
Yes.
Okay, well, now that we've kind of beat that to death, and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as we did, we're going to have another podcast just on that. But let's hit your four other pieces of your
Yes.
six. What
Yes,
are
and
they?
two we can kind of take in tandem because I think they
Okay.
are at the crux of why hybrid work is still so frustrating for so many folks. So one is lack of community and one is lack of autonomy. So we
Mm-hmm.
need that sense of flexibility and we need that sense of belonging, that keen awareness, that perception that I'm showing up to work with a group that I like with people who I care about, who I know care about me, where I know I'm valued. That belonging piece is really, really critical. And so right now, those two things tend to be at tension. They're fighting with each other because people are saying,
Mm-hmm.
I had that flexibility and autonomy in spades for 2.5 years. I proved to you, leaders, that I could do my job sitting in my PJs, dressed with a nice shirt, from the waist up,
Yeah.
doing my work and, kicking butt and meeting all of, what we had to go through. And you're going to try and take that away from me. And it's one of the
Mm-hmm.
most powerful psychological needs we have to make
Mm.
our work feel motivated about our work. And it's that sense of autonomy. And so we need both of them, but it's hard. It's a
Yeah.
really hard environment to craft both of them. And so that's 3 and 4. Five would be unfairness. So if I
Mm-hmm.
am in an environment where there is outright unfairness, right? Maybe there's
Mm-hmm.
incivility, or there's a lot of closed door meetings. I know something's going on and
Mm-hmm.
nobody's saying anything to me about it. It's also organizational politics and red tape. I just need
Mm-hmm.
an answer to something, and it's taking me 6 weeks and 5 people and 7 forms, and before I can,
Mm-hmm.
kind of get to that yes or no piece. And the last one is values disconnect. So meaning that I want certain things from my work. I want work to
Mm-hmm.
fuel me in certain ways, and there are things that I value about my work. But my workplace environment isn't giving me those things. Maybe my work the organization's values are somewhat different than mine, and so they keep butting heads, and so that becomes stressful for folks. So those are the core six.
Love it. Love it. Especially the values one. I
Mhm.
do that with people often. It's like, what do you value? I was doing an interview for a client the other day for somebody he was bringing on. And I asked the girl, I was like, what are your workplace values? And oddly enough, pay and income was not one of her top ones, but that recognition and
Yes.
growth were at the top. And it's interesting, if people took the time to understand that about their employees, then you really have so much inside knowledge about what's important to them and making sure that their values are in alignment there. So
And I
so
do
many
I
good pieces here. Yeah.
Yes. I do want to punctuate, though, that like compensation and benefits do encompass part of what we say when we say reward or recognition. So that is a
Mm-hmm.
piece of the
Sure.
puzzle. So I don't want to just completely like dismiss it, but we've like way overshot the mark on
Right.
how we use those things.
Yeah, like you said, it's easy. You know what I mean? You don't have to do much work, just increase that
No.
hourly rate, give that bonus, it's always the first go-to for people.
Yes.
Yes. And funny because at the same time, employers will not hire more people because of budget issues, right? And create the unmanageable workloads, but then be willing to like throw money at people so that they avoid that burnout. So
Yes.
great, great, great pieces here. Like I said, we could have a whole nother conversation on this, and we probably will. But it kind of wrapping things up, I think it's
Mhm.
important that one, you've got kind of the accountability on the employee side, right? To look for those
Mhm.
warning flags, understand when you are feeling burnt out, take that to somebody and have a conversation, be solution oriented instead of just dumping your feelings out and expecting someone to do something. And on the employer side, really looking out for those red flags. Take this little survey about the six core pieces that you've given to say, look, how do I show up? How does our company show up when it comes to these things? And really assess that. And I think that goes a long way in preventing and being aware and being able to do something about it. But
Yes.
this is your specialty. This is what you do with people all day long, companies and individuals.
Mhm.
So if somebody really wanted to dig in more to this, or have you help them shine a light on where they are with their company, where can they find you and what do you offer for people?
Sure. So my website is stressandresilience, all spelled out, .com. So stressandresilience.com. So we have a
Mm-hmm.
whole host of ways to help. We have workshops. We have assessments that we give. There's consulting layers. We have a certificate course. So focusing on how to create sort of an anti-burnout environment and build the resilience of your teams. We have on-demand content of a number of different forms. We have free downloadable worksheets and checklists and things, and that's all on the website. So, and my book, Beating Burnout at Work, as well. So, lots of different resources to help.
I love it. There is absolutely zero excuses as to why you can't lean in and learn a little bit more about how to avoid burnout in the workplace. It's literally a topic that comes up every single day. I did a piece on the news about it for, burnout and dealing with bosses and how to
Mhm.
kind of cope with all of that. And I had set my Google alerts to pull up burnout in the workplace so I would know when there's kind of relevant conversations or topics about it. And it's literally an alert I get every single day. There is a piece
Yes.
on it.
Yes.
So it is there, and being
Yeah.
aware of whether or not it's in your workplace is huge. So thank you for sharing all that. One last question for you. I always like to ask my guests, you've shared your wisdom today, but I know somebody in your life has probably shared some wisdom with you that you have carried and used again and again. So what is that most valuable piece of wisdom that you've been given before?
That's such a great question. And I feel like I don't know that it came in the form of words, it came in the form of actions.
Mm,
Really, I think I would say my parents, mainly my father, who left his sort of safe job way back in the early 1980s to start a plastic injection molding company, and
mm,
started it as a side hustle, and then eventually left his job to go in full time when my brother and I were 9 and 6 respectively. And so I think learning first and foremost from him about the payoff from taking good risks and knowing what good risks are was
mm,
something that really resonated with me. And then being able to sort of sit with him and talk with him as my business goes through different iterations about what he was thinking and how he thought about the process, and the benefits that have come from him being able to having taken a good risk and seeing it pay off, are really things that I have kept me, I think, continuously looking for ways to make an impact and not necessarily just feeling safe or staying safe in my
mm-hmm.
work and in my world.
I love it. Sounds like you had a good leader in your life as a father then.
Yes, absolutely.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Paula. Okay, you all, avoid the burnout. Follow Paula Davis. Go to her website, get all the free tools and downloads, and reach out if you need her. Paula, thanks again for sharing today.
Thanks so much, Angie.